And as I welcome everybody here today, what I say every Sunday morning is the members of this church warmly welcome you. And I'm sure I can speak in behalf of Related Properties, who also warmly welcome you. I'm going to first try to tell you a little bit about Christian Science, what it is and what it isn't. It is not Scientology. It has nothing to do with Scientology. Christian Science is wholly Christian. The name of the first Church of Christ scientist was given by Mary Baker Eddy when she founded the little church in 1879. Scientist is a modifier which describes the scientific practice of Christianity. So our religion is based in the Bible from the very beginning of Genesis, the first chapter, all the way through the Gospels, through the letters to the churches, the early churches, and finally through the book of Revelation. So we are distinctly and only a Bible-based religion. Also, Christian Science is not a cult. We do not worship Mary Baker Eddy. Some people have that misunderstanding, but it's pretty clear when you see the history of the church how this was not to be. In fact, Mrs. Eddy ordained an impersonal pastor. She first founded the church in 1879, and it was called the Church of Christ Scientist. Afterwards, in 1892, this same little band reorganized the church, and it became the first Church of Christ Scientist, also known as the Mother Church in Boston, Massachusetts. This church is one of the many worldwide branches of the Mother Church. When Mrs. Eddy first started the church, she was the first pastor to speak in the church. After that, she resigned this position, although her students really didn't want her to. And she appointed others, and others were elected by the memberships to preach in the various churches. Mrs. Eddy found as time went on that these services, the sermons, were not really accurate in the way that Christian Science was taught. And so later on, she ordained 2 books as an impersonal pastor. And those books are read from every Sunday in every Christian Science church all over the world. They are the Bible and the Christian Science textbook, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. These 2 books are also read on Wednesdays, where Christian Scientists gather for testimony meetings to hear expressions of gratitude for the healings that they have had by practicing Christian Science. Mrs. Eddy, what she called the falling apple, occurred in 1866 in the month of February. Mrs. Eddy had always been sickly as a child and into her early adult years, and she had a fall on the ice, and this fall was considered not to be healable. In fact, the attending physician didn't really think that she would recover from this, that she would pass on. So after the 3rd day in this state, Mrs. Eddy picked up her Bible. She had grown up in a family which was Bible-centered, and so she was very familiar with the Bible, and she opened the Bible to the book of Matthew, where she read a healing testimony, a healing demonstrated by Christ Jesus. She rose from the bed, dressed herself, and in her words was forever after in better health than she had ever been. This seemed a miracle also to Mrs. Eddy, even though she knew it was the hand of God. But she didn't know how it happened. So for the next 3 years, she searched the scriptures. Mainly her Bible was the King James Version of the Bible. And if you read her writings and her primary work, Science and Health, you will see many quotes from the Bible. You will also see that her language has that poetry of one being very familiar with the King James Version of the Bible. So Mrs. Eddy searched this Bible for 3 years, trying to find out how she was healed. And finally, she discovered what we know as the science of the Christ, or Christian Science. In Mrs. Eddy's words in one of her other published writings, she defines Christian Science this way: as the law of God, the law of good, interpreting and demonstrating the divine principle and rule of universal harmony. I just love that, because really the thing that all mankind wants and needs is freedom. And I'm so grateful to be here this morning and share with you some of the experiences of being a Christian Scientist over 30 years. I have been in that healing practice for 30 years. I have witnessed healings for myself, my family, and many who call on me. And this is because I have studied a rule. It is a principle. Mrs. Eddy called that principle God. We also know God as love. And so if you look on the wall of the church, you will probably see in every Christian Science branch church all over the world these three quotes. The middle one is God is love. And you can find that in 1 John in the New Testament of the Bible. The second would be from Christ Jesus, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And the third from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mrs. Eddy, divine love always has met and always will meet every human need. This is a way really a Christian Scientist endeavors to lead his or her life, having those three things at the very center. I would also like to speak just a little bit, actually read a quote by Mrs. Eddy in her message to the Mother Church for 1902. Since you've had the historic tour and you know that the church was designed by Julian Abel, I would like to share with you Mrs. Eddy's thoughts on slavery. Healing, these are her words, healing all manner of diseases without charge, keeping a free institute, rooming and boarding indigent students that I taught without money and without price. I struggled on through many years, and while dependent on the income from the sale of Science and Health, my publisher paid me not $1 of royalty on its first edition. Those were days wherein the connection between justice and being approached the mythical. Before entering upon my great life work, my income from literary sources was ample, until declining dictation as to what I should write, I became poor for Christ's sake. My husband, Colonel Glover of Charleston, South Carolina, was considered wealthy, but much of his property was in slaves, and I declined to sell them at his decease in 1844, for I could never believe that a human being was my property. I'm grateful also for the inspiration and the insight and really a dedication by the architect of what we hope will be a building on the back of the property. He has observed the pond, the reflecting pond in Boston, Massachusetts, and is wanting to design a similar pond right here by our church. This church has members, as branch churches all over the world do, but it's clearly a community church. We are not closed off. We invite you every Sunday and Wednesday to come and hear readings from the Bible and Science and Health, and see for yourself how Christian Science heals. So again, it's a practice based in principle God, who is love. And that's the main thing, the love of God for all his children. And Mary Baker Eddy, having lived a life of sickliness and invalidism until she discovered this science, was the pioneer of this science, and through her life healed everything until she retired, and then dedicated her work to other things, other endeavors. She was the founder of the Christian Science Journal, the Christian Science Sentinel, and in her 88th year, the Christian Science Monitor. Mrs. Eddy passed on in the year 1910. I know that I've just covered a little bit. There's much more to the history of Christian Science, but I really was thinking about what I would like to hear if I were sitting out there in your place. I'm not so sure that all the dates would mean that much to me, but really to know who my neighbor is and why this is an important building, and important and wonderful things happen within this building that include not only the community, but really the whole world. So I'm grateful to have been able to share just a little bit with you this morning about Christian Science. Thank you for being here.